This video is not intended for children.
Hello everyone. Our topic this week was requested by Hunter Wagaspak, Indigo Omega, and Rick Witt. We'll be going over the Tevinter Imperium from the Dragon Age franchise.
So, first things first. The Tevinter Imperium is the oldest human settlement on Thedas, the continent on which all of Dragon Age media has taken place. It began as a trio of northern coastal kingdoms and was largely unremarkable compared to other tribes and kingdoms save for one thing: the prevalence of and the societal power held by its mages. Tevinter had a number of mage communities practicing throughout the kingdoms, and the most skilled mages from each group were given the title of Magister, with the Magisters forming a court that convened in Tevinter's capital, Minrathos, acting as advisors to the kings as well as dictating how magic should be practiced and studied within the kingdoms. A little over 2,000 years before the first game, Dragon Age Origins, takes place, one such Magister, through a combination of power, cunning, and political intrigue, the three traits that remain ingrained into the Tevinter way of life even into the modern day, united each of the neighboring kingdoms and founded the Tevinter Imperium. He declared himself Archon, essentially the Emperor of Tevinter, while the Magisters simultaneously became the noble and upper political courts, with no other form of nobility or royalty being recognized within the Imperium.
Once established, the Imperium would spend the next several centuries becoming the most powerful human settlement on Thedas. Much like the ancient Greek and Roman empires of real-world history, with which the Tevinter Imperium shares many similarities, Tevinter eventually conquered nearly the entire face of the continent. They even sacked Arlathan, the capital of the once mighty elves, after the ancient Elven Empire had begun its decline. See our video on the elves for more details here. In fact, the only known civilization that they have not gone to war with in some capacity over the last 2,000 years or so has been the dwarves, with whom Tevinter quickly became fast allies, for much the same reason that anyone else does: Lyria. In the modern day, the dwarven civilization has been brought to its knees by the omnipresent threat of the Darkspawn, but back when the Imperium was first formed, the Dwarven Empire was also thriving, with vast networks of dwarven cities scattered underground throughout Thedas. Early on, the two empires established a partnership, with Tevinter's boon being shipments of lyrium, the magical substance used to power and create nearly all magical items in existence, as well as empower mages through such practices as the creation of mana potions. This trade and goodwill, unlike pretty much all other international relations, as we'll show you shortly, survives to this day. This is important because while Tevinter's armies were impressive, their ace in the hole is their mages. Obligatory fuck.
Magic was and is intrinsically tied to the very soul of the Tevinter Imperium. Its founder was a mage, its most powerful figures have almost always been mages, with only one brief period in history that could be considered an exception, and it is the only nation on Thedas that has always encouraged the practice of magic. Resultantly, it has long been a commonly held belief that Tevinter's average mages are more skilled and, more importantly, better magically educated than the average mages of all other nations. Using this power, the Imperium conquered almost everything in sight, while building great highways and spreading the ways of the old gods, whom they believed had gifted them with the power of magic in the first place. Everywhere they went for about the first 800 years of the Empire's existence. Then, Tevinter made their first fatal misstep, which would begin a slow but steady decline in power and influence down to the modern day. A cabal of 7 mages, each the high priest of the 7 old gods, came together and performed an act that was up until that point considered impossible. Through the use of blood magic, sacrificing literally hundreds of slaves and reportedly using fully 1/3 of the entire Imperium's stock of lyrium, these 7 Magisters breached the veil and stepped physically into the Fade. For more details on why that's insane, see our video on magic here. But the short version is that the Fade is the realm of magic and dreams, and the veil is the barrier that separates that world from the physical world. Despite the seeming impossibility of the task, they were successful, but the results were disastrous. The 7 Magisters returned to our world twisted and corrupted. They became the first Darkspawn, and began the very first Blight, unleashing a virtually unstoppable horde of destruction upon the land that essentially created famine and salted the earth in the horde's wake simply as a matter of course. The Imperium was hit hard by the first Blight, and when it finally ended, everyone had the time to take a collective breath which is when everyone else noticed that the Imperium, formerly an unassailable force, had been tremendously weakened by the Blight.
The worship of the old gods, previously a unifying force for the Imperium, was violently cast down in the wake of the Blights, as the archdemons that led the Blights, more Blights would occur in the following centuries, were all corrupted old gods, leading many to believe that the old gods had turned on them, especially since it was supposedly the old gods that had directed those 7 Magisters to breach the veil in the first place. Additionally, after the first Blight began, the uncorrupted old gods ceased to speak to their priests. This led to further destabilization within the Imperium, and many of their conquered territories took the opportunity to rise up in revolt, with the eventual result being that Tevinter lost most of their southern lands over the next few centuries, with countries like Ferelden, Orlais, and others declaring independence from the Imperium. A key player in these revolutions was Andraste, a warrior general and prophet, the spiritual founder of the Chantry, the dominant religion of Thedas in the modern day. See our video on the Chantry here for more details. She led a revolution that swept much of the south from Tevinter's control before finally being betrayed by her husband and executed by Tevinter. Despite this, the lands that Andraste freed were never recovered by the Imperium. In addition to this, a few years after her death, Tevinter's then current Archon converted to Andrastianism, an early form of the Chantry, making it the state religion in Tevinter thereafter, which led to the only time in Tevinter history when mages were not at the very top of the Tevinter food chain. The Chantry liked to lock mages up, and by the time the Chantry was properly formed, most of Tevinter were devout Andrastians, so they were willing to play ball. At least at first, with mages being locked away in circles while uniquely retaining some of their socio-political power, unlike in any other country on the continent.
Eventually, though, the strain of trying to stay true to Tevinter's cultural, heavily magical heritage and doing things the Chantry way proved too much, and the Tevinter broke away from the Chantry, as followed by the rest of Thedas, the White Chantry, and established the Imperial Chantry, the Black Chantry, which was virtually the same, except that, in Tevinter, men could serve in the upper clergy, the Chantry is a matriarchal religion, and more importantly, the Black Chantry interpreted one piece of doctrine very differently from the White Chantry. That doctrine being that magic was meant to serve man. The White Chantry essentially interpreted this as meaning that mages needed to be locked up for everyone's good, whereas Tevinter took it more literally, taking it to mean that magic should be used for the good of the people, but never to control people, banning the previously not uncommon Tevinter practice of magical mind control. Mages returned to full freedom and positions of power, with the Black Chantry circles of magi returning to simply being academies of study once more, rather than trying to double as prisons as they do under the White Chantry. This Chantry schism served as the first of 2 final breaks between Tevinter and the rest of Thedas, with the White Chantry even launching a series of failed crusades against Tevinter in order to convert them back to the White Chantry doctrine by force. The second and truly final break came later after the arrival of the Qunari.
The Qunari exploded onto the scene years later, conquering most of what was left of the Tevinter Imperium, followed by much of the rest of Thedas, eventually conquering nearly as much as Tevinter had in its golden age. Things got so bad that Tevinter actually worked together with the rest of the nations of Thedas to fight the Qunari off, despite the still very tense religious and sociopolitical issues between Tevinter and every other country on the continent. It took decades, but eventually the Qunari were repelled, and the final act of the war was a peace treaty between the Qunari and every single nation on Thedas, except for Tevinter. The Qunari had come across the sea from the north, making their foothold on Thedas the northernmost islands and territories, which made Tevinter their immediate neighbors, and Tevinter refused to back down from the threat that the Qunari posed. As such, the Tevinter Imperium, now reduced in size and power but still quite mighty for its size, has spent the last several centuries in a state of constant war with the Qunari. To Tevinter's credit, despite this constant war, Minrathous, the capital of the Imperium, has never once been conquered or taken in all of its 2,000-plus year history. Though if Span's speculation that Dragon Age 4 will take place in Tevinter is accurate, we have very little doubt that that streak is about to end.
Despite the fact that Tevinter is vilified by practically every other society on Thedas, barring the fact that magic is everywhere, and that it is the one place on Thedas where slavery is legal, when you look closely on the structure of Tevinter society, it's actually not that different from places like Orlais, which, for the record, still isn't a good thing, but it's worth mentioning. And we do mean magic is everywhere. Since mages are so common in Tevinter, so too are magical shenanigans. Homes, fortresses, mansions are magically hewn from stone or lifted out of the ground itself, with some members of the Magisterium, the ruling body of magisters, literally having floating homes above the slums of the capital. Minrathos is even famously protected by 3 massive golems along with a host of other magical defenses, not to mention the actual mages and standing military forces stationed there.
The Tevinter Imperium has one of the most rigidly structured societies in Thedas, with the society being broadly broken up into 3 categories: mages, non-mages, and slaves. Each sociological tier has a handful of subcategories within it, but the basic gist is the only way to gain upward mobility is through the use of magic. Mages are king in Tevinter society. If you don't have magic in your blood, there is a very definitive glass ceiling that you will never, ever be able to break, no matter how brilliant or industrious you are, much to the chagrin of the non-magical populace. Obviously, at the top of the food chain is the Archon, who doubles as both the undisputed ruler of the Imperium, as well as the divine, or head, of the Black Chantry. Yeah, no abuse of power there possible at all. Beneath him is the Magisterium, who, along with the Archon, control all of the political and military actions of the Imperium at large. The Magisterium is made up of the most cunning and powerful magisters in Tevinter, as well as high-ranking priests of the Black Chantry, who are also powerful magisters. The Magisterium is made up of mages, both upper and lower class mages. Upper-class mages are those who can trace their magical lineage back to important socio-religious figures in Tevinter's past. Lower-class mages are those who cannot. Upward mobility and hierarchical maneuvering are the highest dreams of most people in the Imperium. To get to the highest echelons, you need magic in your blood. This means that lower-class mages can still make it to the top, but higher-class mages come from long lines of carefully cultivated magical lineages, and between that and decades of political acumen under their belts, such families have a leg up on the competition.
The next step down you have is the non-mage citizens. These people have all of the same rights as mage citizens, but they can never reach as high politically or socially. This is where most of the kingdom's merchants, artisans, soldiers, etc. come from. Life's not terrible, but it's not as good as it could be. And it's a common dream for these normies to hope for mage children, since such children could elevate the whole family into the lower class mage portion of society. Which brings us to the lowest level of Tevinter society, the slaves. Slaves have few to no rights, and cannot be freed from their predicament except by their master in an official meeting before a legally appointed judge, or in their master's will after the master's death. But even then, they don't become full-fledged citizens of the Empire. Instead, they essentially become high-class slaves. They can earn wages, they can own property and such, but they have maybe half of the rights and privileges of fully-fledged non-magical citizens, to the point that they can't even serve their military due to their former slave status. Even mage slaves aren't safe. Being a slave with magical talent doesn't afford you any extra societal standing. Mage slaves can and are commonly owned, though being freed allows you to join a mage academy, and thus mage slaves presumably have upward social mobility unavailable to non-magical freed slaves. As previously noted, Tevinter is the only nation on Thedas that publicly approves slavery. In fact, their whole empire is literally built upon the backs of slaves. Numerous sources indicate that if their slave labor force suddenly dried up, the empire would collapse. But notice that we said publicly. Tevinter doesn't go grab all of these slaves themselves. Sure, some Tevinter citizens are sold into slavery, but many slaves come from elsewhere. Slave traders from all nations and walks of life sell people to them, and even some other nations. Orlais, for example, publicly shuns slavery, but practice it quietly in the background regardless.
Not that Tevinter is blameless when it comes to merely paying lip service to the laws of the land, because despite laws against it, it is commonly accepted that most mages in Tevinter practice blood magic. At the end of the day, blood magic is just another form of magic. There's nothing inherently wrong with its use. However, blood magic has a very, very bad reputation everywhere in Thedas, Tevinter included, for 3 reasons. First and most obviously, it requires blood, and the blood doesn't have to be your own. You can bleed others dry for the power of their blood, which obviously has negative implications. Second, blood magic is usually associated with the summoning and possession of demons, which again has obviously negative implications. Third, Blood magic is either the only way or the easiest way to perform many other of the most illegal, heinous, or simply frightening magical practices, most notably, mind control. So since way back when Tevinter worshipped the old gods, the practice of blood magic has been a common staple of Tevinter life. However, when the country converted en masse to the Chantry, that changed. Mind control was strictly outlawed, and with it, the practice of blood magic in general.
But while blood magic is illegal, in practice it has become the kind of closet activity everyone knows is happening but no one can prove. If any mage is caught practicing blood magic, they will be severely punished. In fact, catching your enemies in the use of blood magic and providing proof is a great way to get a leg up on the competition. Even so, it is commonly understood that almost everyone, especially the mages in the highest echelons of society, practice blood magic behind closed doors. Indeed, there is a related assumption by many that if you don't practice blood magic yourself, you won't have the power to compete with your foes. That's not to say everyone practices blood magic. In fact, the 2 Tevinter party members you can have over the course of the games are both strongly against its use. But keeping that sociological assumption in mind that everyone uses blood magic and thus you need it to compete, in a society where striving to climb the social ladder is a major drive, and combining that assumption with the very common practice of owning slaves, and you can see where things start becoming very dark very quickly. Combine that with Tevinter's history of conquest, their twisting of accepted religious doctrine, being mostly responsible for the Blight's existence, and continuing to fight a war all other countries gave up on centuries ago, and it's little wonder that every other nation on Thedas vilifies the Imperium, rightfully or not.
And that's the Tevinter Imperium, mighty megocracy of the Dragon Age franchise. We hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please leave us a like and maybe share it with someone we know might like it. If you have ideas for other videos you'd like to see us do in the future, do like Hunter Wagaspack, Indigo Omega, and Rick Witt, and let us know in the comments down below. If you'd like to see more videos from us in the future, be they lore, let's play, or other, go ahead and hit that subscribe button.
In the meantime, this has been True Masters and Morons, signing off. Thanks for watching this video. If you'd like to see more like it, hit that subscribe orb.
To see our last Let's Play, click or tap the link on the right.
For our last lore video, click the link on the left.
Thank you to all of our patrons for making these videos possible.
Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.